What's up, guys? This is Heis, and welcome back to Stories from the Shop, where, as you saw in the thumbnail, that's a boxcar. Definitely. Totally. Well, legally, per railroad rules, it was a boxcar. For our intents and purposes, it was a boxcar, and a boxcar being at the mechanical facility is a bad time. So let's get into a little context of how and why and what I mean with that, okay? There's a lot of different kinds of movements that happen on the railroad. Most of the time, they're scheduled trains, or they're trains with a dedicated train symbol from one place to another. You're moving cars, maybe you're not. And these trains will have different symbols to them, each one meaning something different. Is it a coal train? Is it a grain train? Is it a high priority intermodal train that stops for no one, and if it breaks, everyone goes, ah! That sort of thing. There's also movements within terminals, local jobs, yard jobs, all that sort of stuff. But some of the lesser known things are the things that are just done for the logistics of the sake of the railroad and other railroads. And that's kind of what we get into with this story here. See, a normal qualified engineer and conductor are set up to be able to move pretty much anything on the railroad, with some minor exclusions here and there that are not pertinent to general railroading of the story. But if you're an engineer, you're a conductor, you guys are set up to move trains, with cars behind them, locomotives, the whole nine. There are some special folks called hostlers who are only allowed to move locomotives. So you've got a team of hostlers. Their job is, hey, the yard crew is going to put the train together in the yard. The car shop's going to inspect it. And the hostlers are the people who go around and put together the power. Because depending on where the trains ended up at, whether they're coming from the roundhouse, whether they're coming from another yard, whether the train that just dropped its cut off was at the other end or a different part of the terminal, and you needed that fourth locomotive. Well, okay, now somebody's got to go 10 miles away, bring the fourth locomotive up here. It's a big waste of time to have the engine crew that's going to take that train across the country, at least part ways, to do that. So they have a dedicated team of guys called the hostlers. And at the BNSF in our Seattle terminal, they were reported by what hour they started at. So you had the 7 o'clock hostler, the 1300 hostlers, the 1400 hostlers, and they'd work up to a 12-hour shifts collecting locomotives and moving things around. We were one of the big interface points for them, because any bad locomotives they would bring to the roundhouse, and any good ones they would take. And usually as inconveniently as possible for us, because it was the most convenient for them. They would go around and pick up all of the broken choo-choos and bring them to the roundhouse in one slug. So we're capable of servicing basically 8 locomotives on the service pad at a time, and then we have to respot and deal with that. And it would be common that we'd be sitting there going, okay, anything to do today? We've got a couple locomotives in for maintenance, and they're fully staffed. There's nothing else coming in. There's a bunch of broken engines that show up on our thing, or a bunch of locomotives that need maintenance coming up due, and all that stuff that show on the program that are in the terminal, but they're not here. Hey, yard, could we get those? No. We're trying to make trains run. We're the superstars. We're the jocks. We're the quarterback. We're throwing a touchdown pass right now. We can't afford to do this. So then all of a sudden, 16 locomotives would be let in by the one working one, and everyone would go, we need to service all this stuff, and our metric's going to be bad because all this arrived at once. And that was kind of the way the shop worked all the time. So the hostlers are moving locomotives around, right? Well, we also have what some people called an inside hostler, but to me and the rest of the roundhouse crew, they were the laborer engine movers. We had 4 different crafts at the roundhouse. Previously, there were more, but things have slowly condensed over the years. You had machinists, electricians, pipe fitters, and the laborers. The machinists would take care of anything pertaining to the diesel engine, to running gear, brakes, that sort of stuff, air, all that stuff. The electricians would take care of most of the electrical things, except for the crap that they didn't want to do that they pawned off on the machinists. Yeah. That was always interesting, and there's a million stories of the way that the unions made things challenging to guarantee that folks had jobs, which there's a whole history there too, but when you're talking strictly for the logistics, it made things interesting. You had the pipe fitters, who fit pipe, They would deal with anything in terms of water lines, oil lines, lube lines, pumps, any piped connections. And then in our terminal, they also took over the former cab carpenter job. So if something went wrong with the water cooler, it's not a refrigerator, it's a water cooler, they would replace it. And one of the union nuances is that they were not allowed to plug the fridge in because that was a cord. So they couldn't unplug it or plug it back in, but they could remove it and replace it. And so you'd have a pipe fitter come in saying, "Oh, it's ready for the electrician to put the whip on it." And it's like, that's just plugging it into the wall, guys. Like, come on. Sometimes they had to rewire it and whatever, and that made a lot of sense, but it's like, a 110 plug? Really? Anyway. But lastly, we had the labor engine movers, and they were the guys that had the fun jobs of cleaning out toilets and doing the general servicing of locomotives at the service pad, cleaning XYZ, you name it, whether it be locomotives, pits, trash, scrap, whatever. They really were the people who helped make sure that the roundhouse was moving in every extent of the word. But they also were the people that moved the power around the roundhouse, and they were the only ones who were allowed to. Different shops, different terminals were different ways. Some shops are set up so that machinist electricians can move their own power and do their own thing, and those places make more sense away from a roundhouse. For us, we had the singular choke point that was the turntable, which caused a lot of nuanced challenges in terms of logistics, and everybody knew how to play that choke point as a fiddle. It was very common that you'd have 3 or 4 locomotives that needed to release on second shifts, and the second shift's going midway through, and everybody's locomotive was ready to go outside and be tested like 25-30 minutes before lunch, 5 o'clock. Wow, that's weird. What a coincidence. All of them were just not quite ready until right then, and the movers were moving something else, so they couldn't get to it, and they have to take it out, bring it to the table, start it up, and then spot it. They might be late to lunch, so they're going to go to lunch now, and they'll take care of it after lunch. Lunch was 20 minutes long, so 5:20 it's over, and about 5:35 people start sifting back out and doing things, and then one by one, those 4 engines would go out, be pulled out onto the table, started up, checked for leaks, spotted in their location, then they'd go for the next one. So the 4th engine would go out at like 7 o'clock. The guys who knew that, they knew that if they got done right beforehand, there's a lot of engines that had to go out, and there always was. They knew that they would get an extra long break, and that was just the way it was. And, at the end of the day, logistically, very annoying when you're trying to get production to happen. But at the same time, when you've got good guys on it who are taking care of you and making sure the power is done and done right, you just let him have the extra break. That was my philosophy, at least. Some people would try and micromanage and put the whip on, and I was always, I don't know, more of the non-confrontational nice guy, I guess. But maybe that's why I was a bad boss. But anyway. So the laborers are moving power. They're the ones that respot everything, move things around, and I promise this is getting back to our boxcar, right? So just like the hostlers are only allowed to move locomotives, the laborers are only allowed to move locomotives within mechanical limits. So they can't go beyond the derail, and they can only move locomotives, nothing else. So a boxcar appearing at the roundhouse, directly in front of the service track, where normally locomotives flow one particular direction, and if they have to go in and out versus continuing one direction, it kind of ruins everything. A boxcar appearing there would be really bad. And it was. And lo, a boxcar appeared. But this boxcar looks a heck of a lot like a GP9, I believe. Why is it a boxcar? It's a locomotive. Well, that's probably why it ended up there. One of the crews that was assigned to come into our facility, Interbay was weird. We had an industry within mechanical limits, so occasionally you would have a switch job come in. They'd come through the derail, go and switch out a couple cars at this one industry, and then they'd come sneak by us and go out. And I mean, it was like 1 or 2 refrigerator cars every other day kind of thing. It was small traffic, but they would service it here and there. And technically, we always disobeyed this rule, but if the derail was down, so, you know, we're connected to the main line and there's no isolation, technically the laborers shouldn't move anything, but they did us the favor in terms of continuity, like understanding they weren't going to go run out there, that they would keep moving, and they were far enough away. It wasn't a conflict or anything. It was just by letter of the law. They're not supposed to, and they kept doing it, which was kind. But technically, while that was happening, they shouldn't. And so that crew came in the one day, and they had a locomotive on their train that wasn't a BNSF locomotive. I think it was a Portland and Western. It's painted up Genesee in Wyoming. I don't remember exactly what it was. But it was what is known as a revenue move, where that company had purchased the locomotive or was moving it from one railroad of theirs to another over our railroad. And so they set it up like a boxcar. They removed the MU hoses. They removed any ability for the locomotive to function. And it is, for all intents and purposes, a boxcar that is shaped and painted like a GP9. So to our railroad, it's a load. It's a boxcar. It's not something we can start up and run. It's not ours. We have been contracted to just move it. But the train crew brought it in. For whatever reason, it got to the yard, and the yard went, oh, that's a locomotive. Hey, you guys are going over to the shop to spot some refrigerator cars anyway. Just take it with you and just dump it off and they'll service it. Nope. We weren't supposed to get that. Yes, it's a locomotive, but no, it's a boxcar. That was supposed to go somewhere else. And so this thing comes in, it gets set north of Service 1. So I explained this whole thing on camera, but this really just makes more sense if I talk you through it. Here we have the south derail. This was the entry to our facility, the whole yard's here on the side. And this is Google Earth. Shout out Google, anyway. South derail here is the end of mechanical limits. There is an ancient spur there that goes nowhere and hasn't been used in an eon to that industry. And then you started having switches to the different service tracks here, and this is downstairs, and that's upstairs, as we talked about. So you've got the roundhouse and all of the storage for all of the broken stuff over there. And down on this side of the world, you have all the service tracks. So you have the main lead that the yard jobs would occasionally come run through, that would run all the way past us on this track, and they'd go service this industry up here with the refrigerator cars that were mentioned. Normally we'd bring things down and then spot them from the north side of the pad down to the pads themselves, which are where these sand towers are. You could fit 4 units on each, okay? And so we had the track for the sand cars, which occasionally got spotted once in a blue moon. You had Service 1, Service 2, then 3, 4, 5, and then that track had a different name. I don't remember what it is. And those tracks also had different names as well. But all the outbound power would get built over on these tracks. Anything that was long had to get built on Service 4 or Service 5 because of just how long those tracks are versus these ones. So the boxcar got spotted right next to the sand cars on Service 1. So rather than being able to use all of this track, and we'd usually leave the sand car switch fouled out because we didn't ever need to really access it except once, every couple months. You could park a whole slew of engines there, but that boxcar was right there, just to the north. And so instead, they had to pull everything from the south, and then you can realize, oh wait, the next connection to anything is to 3, but that's where the pit is. That's the inbound inspection area. And okay, so then you have to back all the way down underneath the bridge, almost to the derail itself, to then go to one of the other service tracks here. So making that move at mechanical limit speed of like 5 miles an hour took forever. It's all about the geometry of how things were set up. So it's just one of those things. So definitely was a complete and utter pain in the butt thanks to the boxcar showing up. And then as things flowed, we got locomotives finished, we'd respot to the south, and then you're right there at the lead, and you could go put the service locomotives wherever they needed to go, either staying downstairs and getting spotted on service 3, 4, or 5, or they'd come upstairs to where they would get work done on them for whatever reason. Sometimes things came in for just sand and fuel, and most of the times things came in because they were broken or it was maintenance. So most of the time things would flow upstairs to the roundhouse up the hill. And so when a boxcar gets parked north of service 1, nothing can now flow. We can't couple into it. By rule, and everyone upheld this, and fair enough, because the laborers could actually get into some serious trouble for having touched a revenue load. Like, this was not just them giving us a tough time as managers, right? For that boxcar to have been placed north of service 1, it meant that we couldn't flow in the normal operation. So everything had to come in and be totally cleared out before more locomotives could get put on. And it just so happened that one of those big slugs of 15 or 16 locomotives showed up all at once. And Service 2 was able to be spotted the normal way, but you had to spot Service 1 from the south, and there's not a great place to stash a big cache of locomotives without fouling that main track that is used by yard jobs occasionally. So you can't really leave that fouled. You don't want to leave a mess there. So you're putting trains on like Service 3 or Service 4, but Service 3 was where we did inbound inspections, so it's not great to park them there, and we can't park them north because there's the revenue move boxcar on that track. And the other funny thing about this is that the flip side of we're not able to run on the main, a ton of the train crews thought that they couldn't run on and off the service pad. They were worried about going into that mechanical area just in case people were working, and they were always nervous about it. I think by rule they were allowed to, but a lot of guys would outright refuse, which means that you couldn't then grab the darn boxcar from the south because the train crew wouldn't want to do it. So they had to get it to the north, so all of our normal storage was taken up by one boxcar. So we had to figure out where to put all these other locomotives, and they ended up clogging the other service tracks, which is where our outbound power would normally get built. There's only so much space. It's a tight yard in Seattle. There's really not a whole lot of industrial room. And so we're dealing with all this, and it was just like the most big headache. And the service crews, man, they loved it. Are you kidding me? That meant it took like an extra hour and a half to spot the pad. They were like, oh man, kick up, listen to the Mariners game, had their newspaper out, like, hey man, this is my big job. I'm down at the service track. I'm supposed to be taking care of this stuff. And too bad that I gotta wait. It's a bummer, you know? Oh no. So it was just a cluster because we couldn't move the darn boxcar. The normal people that came over to the roundhouse, the hostlers, they couldn't move the boxcar. And nobody at the yard understood why or what it was because, shocker, communication at the railroad is bad. And so when we told them we have a locomotive here that's a boxcar, like it's a revenue move, they're like, well, it's a locomotive. Doesn't it need to be serviced? And it's like, no, forget that it looks like a locomotive. It is a boxcar. Come pick it up. Well, can we send the No. How do you not know the rules? You're the yard. Come on, you know? And so it was like 2 days-ish that we had to deal with this, where it's just like, this thing is here. It's screwing up our entire day. Like, somebody get this piece of junk out of the way and get it on its way. Not to mention, I'm sure that the owners of the railroad that were trying to move the locomotive, I'm sure they were wondering, why isn't our locomotive in transit? Why is it still stuck in Seattle? Because nobody really knew what was going on. Yeah, so the nuances of what you can and what you can't do based on what crafts always led to some interesting little nuanced things, whether you're on the shop, whether you're out on the road. And obviously, I mean, at the end of the day, some of the history of why we have unions, holy crap, do some reading, because it is a very good thing, because some of the stuff 100 plus years ago and even more recent than that is kind of horrifying. And so there's a very big point and purpose to that, but sometimes the logistical challenges that then came with some of those rules, unplugging and plugging the fridge in, made things a little interesting, particularly when you're on second shift and poor Romeo's the only electrician you have on shift. He's supposed to be servicing stuff on the service track, and you ask him to walk 3/4 of a mile to come plug in a fridge, and then go back down. So, always a fun logistical challenge, no matter what it is on the railroad. But that's why a locomotive can sometimes be a boxcar, and sometimes why it can be a big problem. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this little story. Hope you enjoy the content. Please leave any comments down below if you'd like to hear any more stories or you have any other things you'd like me to talk about. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you all next time.